All right, welcome to the third live stream, looking at building an environmental analysis dashboard. The first week, or the first live stream, we were looking at really how to um, project data onto the viewport. Um, so let me pull that up here. I'm going to run the Windrose component from Ladybug in Grasshopper. And you'll see that that is now projecting onto the onto the viewport. So that is the first thing that we did um, for the first live stream. And uh, the nice thing about this is that um, you get that information overlaid um, in the viewport. So you no longer have to worry about navigating around or moving that base point so that your geometry is not over um, the analysis, but you can see it no matter where you are in the model. The second live stream was more of a charrette with Eric and the team in Ontario, just looking at what information should we be putting on the dashboard and what can be easily digested by the designers using this tool, as we don't want to create tools for designers that aren't used and that aren't useful. So worked with the team in Ontario, regenerative design team, and then had Jake, a student intern in our office, in the Ontario office, had him put together some graphs based on that conversation, looking at what we thought might be the best information to display on the dashboard. And so we have a percent or like a monthly comfort hours chart. And so this is really just showing um, each month and then how comfortable people are in those months. And so you can see a lot of times people are cold. Green would be the optimum range. Um, and so um, the next graph that Jake has identified, just based off of our conversation last week, um, is the monthly average hourly temp chart. And so this really helps to identify the problem areas for the site and for the building. So this is a really nice visual graphic that can help us understand the relationship between temperature and time. And then we move to the windrows and looking at, okay, we have our hourly wind speed or our windrows with an hourly data, wind speed hourly data, but thought maybe it would be more helpful to show the temperature as our hourly data. Um, and so that is one of the adjustments that Jake has made to the windrows, and then showing the sun chart on the dashboard as well. Um, most probably feel that's intuitive, but it's always good to have that on there just to make sure. And so before we start putting all of these things onto the dashboard, I thought it might be a good idea to start building the user interface for things like um, defining the analysis period, for searching for an EPW file, um, for the analysis settings, and so on. So let's, I'm going to switch back to the other Grasshopper file, which is the dashboard part one. I'm going to delete all of this stuff that I've been workshopping. Um, and we're going to just start building the user interface. And so I'm going to start with analysis period. Um, and we're going to be using human UI for this portion. Um, so we're going to just be projecting the analysis data onto the dashboard using the standard um, components, or not standard components, the components from human, um, which are render mesh to screen or render curve to screen, and so on. Um, But for the user interface where we're having the user input data or search for data, we're going to want to use human UI for that. We could publish to the Grasshopper panel here, but I find that the um, human UI components are a lot uh, more friendly and visually appealing. So let's just dive in to that. All right. So the first thing I'm going to want to do, if you're unfamiliar with human UI, is I'm going to want to create a window. And then essentially, conceptually, I want to add things to that window. And so let's just kind of set up that workflow. So I grab the launch window component, um, and that's from the UI main dropdown. And so this is looking for a Boolean toggle in order to show or hide the window. It's going to look for a name for that window. It's going to look for the default width and the default height. These things can be changed by the user after, but this is upon launch of the window, the default size. And then it's going to look for the font family. Usually I just leave this as a default unless you know for sure that you have a font family installed on every single computer in your firm. Um, or if you're just an individual using Grasshopper, not a problem. I think if you enter a font that the computer, that it's not a system's font, I believe it will just default back to the system's font. Um, so even if you do add that customization, I don't think it's that big of a deal if the system font isn't there. Um, but don't take my word for it. So let's just start kind of feeding in that information. We're going to grab a toggle, plug that in. We're going to grab a panel. Um, the name for this will be environment. Oh, spelled incorrectly, but we can fix that later. Um, and so then I'm going to launch that. So I'm going to toggle that to true. And probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this false start toggle. I'm just going to drag and then hold Alt down to copy it. And I'm going to plug this component into the launch window. The reason being is this false launch toggle is always going to default to false value when you open up your file. So sometimes you don't want to have all these toggles um, be left on true. So like um, if you save the file, close out, then all the toggles are set to true. So when you open it, it takes a while to process. So this resets everything to false after you save and close out. So you don't have to do that manually, which is really a nice feature. So we'll set that back to true, and you can see now we have this window floating around. I'm going to leave the default width and height for now, and we'll see kind of as we populate this window, um, kind of the size restraints that we would like um, to change. Um, so now we have to grab a component that will allow us to add elements to this heads up display or UI element. Um, and so to do that, you're going to grab the add elements component. And then what this add elements component is looking for, it's looking for a window, and it's looking for the elements as a list. And so if we throw that window, or connect those two components, you'll see that the elements input failed to collect data because we have nothing there. And so now um, we can start creating the elements. And then if there's anything that you guys see that I'm maybe missing or something that could be a little simpler, um, just let me know in the chat box. Um, and yeah, we can figure it all out. Um, I'm no means a pro with human UI, um, but yeah. So let's start kind of looking at how to insert the analysis period data into this table. Um, Given the fact that we're going to have a lot of different inputs for the user, I think we're going to want to use um, or want to have some kind of collapsible header here so that we can expand and collapse that information. So after we set it, we might not have any need to see it anymore. So just in order to save space and organize um, the user interface. So let's see where that may be. So I believe that would is going to be in UI containers, and then you go down to the first component, create expander. And so now this is going to take all the elements that I want to add, put it into an expanded header, and then add that element um, into the UI. Um, and so for the analysis period, we're really looking at month, day, and potentially, I know hour and maybe year. So let's pull up the um, Ladybug component, the analysis period component. So I'm just going to double click on the canvas and type in analysis. And hopefully that will populate. There we go, Ladybug analysis period. We're just going to use that one. And so we can look at the inputs here just to see what we need to build into the user interface or the UI. I'll probably use those two terms interchangeably, just so you're aware of what UI stands for. It is user interface. Um, so it looks like I only need the month, the day, and the hour. Um, I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I think it's an average, a yearly average. So specifying the year doesn't necessarily matter. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone. Um, and so first we'll start to populate the from month. The nice thing about this is once I do the first three, the last three inputs on this analysis period are going to be the same. So it's really just copying those down. And also, I think most of the structure for most of these um, elements are going to be the same. Um, so let's look at our options. So there's a lot of options here for the UI elements. There's buttons, checklist, data tables. I think I'm going to be looking more for like a drop down. It would be cool if we could get a calendar view. The only problem is I don't want that to be visible the whole entire time. Um, and so I think a drop-down menu is going to be the most efficient. Um, so if we navigate over here, we can use the create pull-down menu item or element, component, whatever you want to call it. And so the pull-down component is going to be looking for a label. It's going to be looking for a list of items, and then it's going to be looking for a selected index. So that's going to be your start, um, the whatever index you want to start with. Um, so let's go and check. Let's create a label for this guy. So we're going to double click on the canvas and grab a panel. So um, let's call it month, not month, month. Now plug that in. We want a list, so I'll expand that. We'll do Jan, March, May. Let me know if I've missed any. And then we're going to right click on this panel and just select multi-line data so that it outputs that information not as a string, but as a list of data. So we plug that in, and now you can see we don't have any more warnings because it's grabbing, it has all the information it needs to run. And the default index, I believe, is going to be 0. Um, and so now we can plug this pull down into the expander. Before I do that, I'm just going to plug it straight into the add elements so you can see what happens. So when I do that, it adds this component or that information to um, the user interface. And so it's pretty cool. One thing that might not be evident is let's look at how to grab that information. So we're going to have um, people interacting with this dashboard. And so if they're changing the months, we want to be able to grab that information back and use it to uh, update this analysis period component. So you might think that maybe we can just pull that information from the pull down component, but that is not the case. So you look at what's coming out of this component. It's the information that the add elements component needs to populate the UI. And so there is a component um, that is called the value listener. And so what that is going to do is you're going to plug this pull down component into the values. It's looking for an elements. Um, and that's going to listen to whatever changes or whatever's happening over here in the UI. So then that's going to allow you to grab that information. And so you have two outputs. So one's going to give you the value and one's going to give you the indice of that value. And so when we look at the input for analysis period, it's going to be 1 through 12. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to want to take the indice. But we got a problem because they're not, they're going to be off by 1, given that your indice is at 0 through 11, and we want it to be 1 through 12. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an expression to that output. I'm just going to add x plus 1, and that's just going to add 1 to every value. So October, oh man, that's incorrect. Well, clearly October is not the 8th month um, or ninth month, it's the 10th. Um, so there we go. I believe that's correct. I'm just going to check here. Uh, there we go. Yeah, I don't like that abbreviation. SEP looks like gross. Sorry. Um, anyways, there we go. So now, um, January, when we select January, you're going to get 1 as the value. In October, you're going to get 10. December, you'll get 12. So now when we plug this into C into the month input, we're going to get the correct information. Um, so I'm going to delete, actually I'll keep it just um, so that we can keep an eye on what's going on. So that's great. But now, like I said, I think we want to put this into an expander or like a header that can expand. So I'm going to take that um, pull down um, element, add it to the expander component. And this component has uh, your elements that you add, the header name, and then um, if it starts as an open um, header or a closed, so collapsed header. Um, and what we're going to do, I'm just going to plug this in here, and now you can see that difference. Um, so now we can minimize that information. Let's copy this panel component. Um, Give it a label of analysis period. And then we'll probably want to keep this to true so that it's always open, so that people have to interact with it so that they, are aware of what the analysis period actually is. Um, and so I'm going to also want to add um, the day and the hour. And if we try to add the hour or the day, I'm not going to get too wrapped up in how many days are in a month. We're just going to do a default of 30, and then I'll go back and figure out how to have it respond to the month that's being chosen. Um, but anyway, so let's do the day, the start day. And then to do that, I'm just going to grab a series real quick. Um, and then delete that information. So I'm going to want the first number in the series to be 1 because we can't have 0 days. The steps to be 1, and then we're just going to have the step count be 31 for now. That will be fine. And then I'll set up some rules later down the road so that um, when we're in a month with 28 days, I think February is 28, um, that it will um, update automatically. This is going to be pretty static, but that is okay for now. Um, so now we have the list of days, so 1 through 31. We can delete that expander um, component because we don't need that. We have a value listener, so we're going to want to take the actual value um, from this drop-down menu because the value is a number, which is going to be what the analysis period input is looking for. And then we're going to want to plug this pull down menu or pull down component into the elements expander component. Um, so initially you see we get two different um, headers. I believe that if we flatten this, that's going to compile them into one. Um, and that is because now they're both in the same um, list or um, yeah. Um, but then for me viewing this, I'm looking. I just don't think it's the cleanest way to do it. In my mind, it would be better to have the month, the day, and the hour in one row, and then So that would be the start month, day, hour, and then have the end month, day, and hour in the next row. So I'm going to see if there is some kind of container or element that I can use to accomplish that. And so if we look here, I believe it's going to be the create stack element. So this is going to stack your elements either horizontally or vertically. And so the inputs for this are um, your UI elements, so your pull down menu, and then um, a Boolean toggle, um, which if it's set to true, it's horizontal arrangement. If it's set to false, it's vertical. So we're going to want to leave the default, which is true, because we're going to want to stack them horizontally. And then we're going to want to plug these two elements into that stack component. And then we can take that stack component, we can add it there. And so as you see, nothing happened. I believe that is because we need to flatten it. There we go. So now because they're the same list, they will be um, consecutive and stacked horizontally. So to finish this, the start day off, we're just going to want to take the value that we're getting, and we're going to want to plug it into the from day input. So now you see as we change this value listener component is updating um, the component or the data in Grasshopper. So that becomes really helpful. Say you have users that aren't super familiar or super comfortable with the spaghetti, and they kind of get panicked or um, intimidated. This user interface really helps them so that they don't have to even worry about any of this stuff. Really just open up the file, hit true, toggle that to true, um, and now you have a nicer, friendlier interface for them to be using. All right, so we're going to do the same thing with hours. Nice thing about hours is it's a constant. It's not changing. So we're going to copy that. Let's say hour. Gonna abbreviate it. Um, and now we're gonna want this to be 24. It's 24 hours in a day. The value listener is working. And we're going to plug this pull down component into the stack. And that's going to add hours um, as a pull down menu here. So now you can see we change it to 22. 22 is working. So we can plug that value into from hours. And so before I go any further, I'm going to go ahead and clean this up a little bit. So I'm going to want to align all these to the left. I think these all should be aligned already, but I'm going to want to align these to the left as well. I'm going to want to bring this down. I should have arranged this before. I like to make sure that all these uh, graphs are pretty organized, just so that if anyone is jumping into this file and I'm unable to offer any type of um, help or explanation, that it's um, pretty easy to follow. Alrighty, so we have our first, the start month, day, and hours. Um, the abbreviation here is actually kind of bugging me since it's not consistent with the rest. So I'm just gonna write it all out for now. And I'm going to add start month here, just so it's a little bit more clear. And so like I said earlier, you can start to see that this information is being cut off a little bit. Um, so that's when we'd want to look at setting the default width or the height to a different value so that everything um, is included and nothing is getting cut off from the interface. That way users aren't confused. It's surprising how many people are intimidated by little things like that. And so really we want to work towards making these things the friendliest tools that we can so that adoption of the tool isn't yeah isn't hurt by little issues like that. Um, so I'm going to group all of these, label this as start data. I'm going to copy this all down. I'm going to also grab that component and then attaching these, I believe the order matters. So just make sure you're attaching it in the order that you want them to show up in. And so nothing's going to show up right now. I believe it's because everything is labeled as the same. Um, so I think when we change that, the month data, um, well, let's just keep going and then we'll figure it out. Um, I'm gonna just put E in parentheses to change that value. And then we're gonna throw this stack into the expander. And so we have something that is not working properly. So let's try to figure this out. By unflatten that, it's not going to do anything. Let's disconnect. Okay, so let's go back a little bit and see what's going on here. I'm going to recompute my canvas. All right, so now that is showing up. So I'm just going to manually input all that information. I'm not going to copy it. Let's see if that helps. Create pull down menu. We're going to do list. I'm going to create the end month. So now we have the pull down menu for the end month. Let's see if we can get this put into there, that expander. There we go. So now you see we have that information starting to populate. I'm not entirely sure why it wasn't populating, but it is now. So no need to worry about that anymore. So let's grab another pull down component menu. Take that, copy it, and we'll do end day. I'm not sure, maybe some of the symbols throw it off too. So just for safety, we will keep it all written out. List end day. Just organizing as I go. And then we'll use a value listener. Can't forget about that. It's almost the most important part because you won't be able to use any of the data that you're pulling from the user interface. So like I said, for the months, we're going to want to add an expression x plus 1, just so that we get an accurate value. Let's keep that there and plug this in to month. Then this is a value listener for the days. So we'll take the actual value since it's numerical and plug that into days. And then we'll do the same thing for the end hours. One more component. Um, Align everything. It's just a list. Align it all, because why not? Um, and then don't forget to pull that value out of the interface. And then again, this is a numerical value, so we can just add it to the hour. And we are getting an error, and I'll show you why we are getting that error um, in a minute. So let's add all this to that stack. So we're going to hold down Shift and connect it to that input. And then now we have it all kind of jumbled. So we're going to want to flatten that. And so now it's all showing up how we would like. However, I forgot to add a label for this guy. Noob mistake. I'm going to call it end hours. Let's see if I just type in end hours. Yeah, we're going to do that. So we'll keep start month, end month, and then day, hours, day, hours. So it's pretty clear why that's happening. Alrighty, so now we have an error, which is always fun to get. But in order to, let's look at the error. So the error is start time and end time are identical. So, all right, let's, um, I mean, that's pretty obvious error. So we change that, the hours, then the error is going to resolve. Um, so something that I think would be helpful when we run into this situation is to provide some kind of indicator that there's an issue. Because if the user isn't familiar with Grasshopper and they get a icon that's screaming at them because it's red and they're already intimidated, then they're going to come up here, they're going to exit and never come back. So in order to do that, I'm going to just see what is coming out of this panel. So this is the analysis period. Currently, we're getting a null value. Um, and so let's test this, this output. This is going to be a little bit of hit or miss. I'm just going to start grabbing components. But because eventually what I'm wanting to do is take this analysis period information or header information, and I'm going to want to um, have an alternate so that it calls out the issue. So now if there is an issue, they know that it's with the analysis period. Now, it's not super important now because it's the only um, element in the dashboard. But when we begin to put, analysis or um, simulation settings and um, being able to turn off certain graphs and whatnot, there's going to be a lot more information on this dashboard. And so I want to be able to have a way for users to easily identify um, this issue. So I'm going to take these two elements. I believe I'm going to use some type of gate stream, gate, nope, stream filter, yes. And so this is the gate. So it's going to take a Boolean value or 1, 0, 1, which is essentially the same thing, um, as the switch. And then it's going to switch, it's going to stream between 0 and 1. You can also add more values here. And this then becomes more than just true false. But for the purposes here, I just need a 0 and 1. So 0 is going to be the analysis period without an error. And then 1 is going to be um, the analysis period with an error. And so our output here is going to be plugged into the header. So far, nothing's changed, and that's just because we need to be able to test this and get one value. And Evan said that we should set the default period to 1 for the hour, which is not a bad idea. Or maybe even just setting the default value to something months further so that we're not starting just 2 hours apart. But I'll change the default values right after we figure out how to um, get this null, test this null, um, and then return a 0, 1 value depending on the output. So I'm just going to look up um, this component, the null component, and see what I'm going to get out of this. Um, so I'm getting a true because we have a null value. Invalid flags. All right, so we're getting a true there, and if I change this, we're getting a false. Um, but we're going to need one value. So um, what we can do is if we split this list at 1, potentially, I think this will give us the value that we want. So false. And then if we put it here, true. Beautiful. So here, there's no value, which is fine. We just want to make sure that we're only inputting one value into this. Um, so now if we plug that in there, we now have this analysis period being updated. So the user is now going to understand that, okay, I have an error. It's somewhere in this box or in this expanding panel. When I change it out of that situation, it's just going to revert back to analysis period, which is really helpful, and it helps provide some user feedback, um, which I think is definitely an important feature when designing any type of user interface. It is a user interface, so you want the user to be able to interact with it um, best they can. Um, and that's all about informing the user on what's going on, um, and allowing them the ability to troubleshoot, enabling them to troubleshoot instead of enabling them to come running and asking for help, which is not always bad. Ooh, I have an issue here, right? From day one, I'm going to want to remove this expression. So this is dangerous. When you add an expression and then you just blindly copy that component, make sure to remove the expression. Because if I didn't, I would have ended up with 25 days and or 25 hours, and that is not possible. Um, so um, that is the very, I guess, start of the analysis period for the dashboard. And let's see, I know we can change the color of the window somehow. So I want to see if there's a way to change it to red along with the air. I know probably getting a little bit carried away, um, but why not? Um, let's see. If anyone knows, just go ahead and throw it up there. Um, chart appearance, closer, set windows properties. So this is the window. I wonder if I can just do the expansion. Nope, that doesn't work. All right, so we're gonna plug in the window and we're just gonna have the whole, well, maybe. We're gonna potentially have the whole entire thing turn red um, when there's an error, potentially. Don't hold me to that. All right, we can leave the starting location to default. The theme for the window, I'm assuming that might be another um, component. So accent color, use component menu item, create accent list, show title bar, background color. Oh, there we go. Um, scale factor. All right, so let's go here. Or let's just hover over this accent color, create accent list. I am not seeing it, so let's see if we can just use a swatch. Haha, no, you can't. Theme. All right, so let's slowly go through each one of these and see if there is a component for this. Not, I don't think it's going to be in the elements drop down. It will probably be, I mean, should intuitively be in the UI main. Oh, maybe that's it. Set window property, adjust element, the element to adjust. Oh, there we go. I'm going to delete this. So I'm just going to want this portion to turn red for now. Um, so foreground color, background color, and the font size. Well, that's not helpful. There we go. Um, so this is going to be my warning. Um, my warning color is going to be red. And then let's see what I want the other color to be. Kind of like a muted blue. If anyone hates that, let me know. And then I'm going to dig in and see how I can change the other settings, because I don't like the fact that this is a nice cyan blue and then the background is a lighter blue. I like it to be consistent. But anyways, um, that's actually pretty cool. I wasn't thinking that was going to be a possibility. But now, when users change, um, this is turning red. So now we know that this uh, user interface portion is the the piece with an error, um, which I think is going to be pretty cool and pretty helpful for users who are not super familiar with how to run an analysis. And yeah, so real quick before I wrap up, let's um, let's change the default values for the end month, just so that this is not as common as an occurrence. I think if we start it at 2 hours, I think maybe you're going to get an error more often just by users adjusting incorrectly. Um, but yeah, let's change the default value. So to do that, I'm just going to change the selected index. And so we can choose 14. I believe that will give us 15 as a value. Yep. And then hours, we can probably keep at 1 if we want, but just for safety, we set that to 12. Just doing, oops, I'm going to want to do 11 because I want to grab the half of that value. And then for the month, we'll choose 5. That'll bring us to 6. Yep. So now that's the middle of the calendar year, and this is the beginning of the calendar year. So now I feel like that error um, indication isn't going to be as common, um, but I still think it's an important feature for people who, like I said, aren't very familiar with the tool. So I'm gonna title this error reporting. So yeah, looks like that's probably all we have time for. Um, and actually, before I log out here, Jake in the Ontario office who put together those graphs that I showed earlier, he is thinking that a full year analysis as a default would be the best option. And I would have to agree. So thanks for pointing that out, Jake. So let's bring this to 11. And that is going to set the end month to December. Um, if you're not familiar with Grasshopper, your indices is 0 through however many list items. Everything always starts at 0. So in this case, December is 11. into C11. Um, and then I'm not sure, I guess we would set this to 31, so it's the full entire year. And then this would be, oop, that's incorrect. Sorry. After I just explained it, I inputted this incorrectly. So 30 to get 31, and then default into C here is going to be 23. So that's going to give us a full entire calendar year analysis. And then um, when the designer jumps into this file, they can back it out from there. So they can uh, take the hours uh, down, or they can um, only get the summer months, but at least the default will be the full summer or full entire calendar year. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. So let's just keep building solid foundation, moving forward together, and working smarter and not harder. Um, so um, make sure to keep looking out for the live streams um, and contributing to the chat. Uh, had a great time. See you next time. Bye.